Welcome back to Journalism 102. Let's start talking a little bit about where to find news stories. So one of my best pieces of advice is to get you to start thinking about things that are happening on a state, national, or international level and starting to think about how those events or issues affect the people in your community. So let's say in Jackson, the legislature decides to cut education funding, higher education funding, by 10%. Well, that's going to have an impact on every college or university town in the state. And it's going to have lots of different types of impact. It's going to affect people who are thinking about going to college. It's going to affect cities that depend on colleges and universities for a lot of revenue. It's going to affect people who work at colleges and universities. And so as a journalist, if that event happens in Jackson, you need to start thinking about how it affects people in the communities that you cover. Same thing on a national or international level. I heard of a story this week about J.C. the retail outlet, cutting back on stores throughout the country. And I went online to see if I could find the list, and sure enough, 33 stores on the list, and 2 are here in Mississippi. So depending on what community you live in Mississippi, the story might be, "Oof, we dodged the bullet. People who work at J.C. in our town are okay." Or, "Wow, there are a bunch of people who work in J.C. in our town who are going to lose their jobs. What does it mean to lose that retailer in terms of the types of shopping opportunities available to people? Or is it really not going to have much of an impact?" I mean, that's a story as well. So thinking about how an event that happens outside your community might affect people in your community is what we mean by localizing. You also probably know some people in your life that are actually great sources of news. So I've grabbed essentially a screenshot of the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Years ago, when I was working at WSOC-TV in Charlotte, North Carolina, I met someone who worked at the Department of Agriculture, and he turned into a terrific source of story ideas for me. Because they oversee consumer services, he turned me on to stories about gas stations that were basically selling regular gas at premium prices. He helped me uncover a story about a particular food outlet, grocery store chain in the state that was getting in trouble for the way it had its scanners calibrated. So the way they had them set, they were earning like a half a cent extra on a lot of purchases. And what that ended up meaning for them was millions of dollars more in profits than they should have had, and ripping off the consumer. So you probably know someone in your life who's your go-to person for all things about entertainment in the community where you live. This is the person that always knows when there's a new music group coming to town, who knows about the new restaurants, and there's probably someone that you know or your parents know that's really plugged into state government or really plugged into local politics. So those are people that you want to develop as a source. You want to talk to those people on a regular basis about stories that they know about that you could be pursuing as a journalist. Another idea is to look at news releases. So companies, organizations, governmental bodies are always putting information out to journalists, hoping that they will do a story about it. So a couple years back, just happened to stumble across a story about video game courses and whole degree programs devoted to video game developments being very much on the rise in colleges all around the country. And in fact, there are some programs here in the state of Mississippi. So that made a good news story for one of my students to do. So using this website, PR Newswire, it's as simple as going in and spelling Mississippi correctly and doing a search for stories that might relate to the state of Mississippi. And then, of course, understanding that these are news releases, so they're not unbiased, and so you're going to have to apply some news judgment to them. But it's a possibility for you to take one of these and turn it into a story. So let's see what we have here. A 2013 annual report about early childhood education. That might be a good one. Here's one. U.S. Census Bureau facts for features on Black or African American History Month. Yeah, that's right around the corner, isn't it? So there might be some really interesting stories to do about Black History Month. And here you've got some great data from the U.S. Census Bureau that you might use to help tell that story. Another option for you is personal observation. I can't emphasize this enough. Maybe this should have been first on the list, but just becoming more aware of the world around you is a great way for you to find stories. So let's say you're walking to lunch tomorrow, and on your way to lunch you see two stores that you've never seen before. Well, maybe there's a story to do about the growth of small business in your community. Or maybe you see two stores that have closed since the last time you were in that area. So maybe that's a story about small business struggling in your community. Maybe you've been thinking about just how darn cold it's been lately. Well, then contact someone at your county extension office and find out, is the cold affecting farmers in any way? How does heat affect let's say we're doing this in the summer. If it's blazing hot, what's a story you can do about how hot it is? It's February. Are you seeing lots of Valentine's related things going up in store windows and available on store shelves? So just making yourself much more aware of the things that you see and how those things might translate into news stories. Social media is becoming more and more important for journalists to understand. And if you think about it, there have probably been news stories that you've seen in your Twitter feed or on Facebook. And in fact, as many as 50% of Facebook users say that they have used Facebook as a source of news and information. But you can help yourself use this as a news source by thinking about the people you cover beyond, the people that you follow or you friend beyond those folks that are in your immediate circle. So, you might want to think about starting to follow some local news organizations. You might want to like a few news organization website, Facebook pages. Consider whether or not you want to start building a LinkedIn network with people who might be good sources of news stories for you, depending on the topics that you're really interested in. So we're going to talk a lot more about social media and its impact on finding and disseminating stories, but be aware that that's another great source, especially if you spend a lot of time in social media, is to start looking for those news story ideas while you're there. Okay, so your assignment is to head out in your community and find 3 stories, and I want some description, so don't just say how cold weather is affecting farmers. I want how cold weather is affecting farmers. I talked to someone at the county extension agents, and he tells me that right now there's a big concern about whether or not the lack of moisture combined with the cold is going to mean a late planting season. Or maybe you contact your local Chamber of Commerce and they tell you, yes, we've had a huge increase in business applications, business license applications. Small business is on a boom here in our community. So I want you to have not only just a line about your story, but some evidence that you did some research to figure out who the expert is. So I want you to find an expert who can give you more information about the story, provide that expert's contact information, and I also want you to identify for me the 2 newsworthiness criteria that you're applying to this story. Now, proximity, I'm assuming, is going to be one. So I want you to find 2 newsworthiness criteria beyond proximity. So whether that's timeliness, audience, impact, if there's something related to context, but you need to be finding 3 stories and really fleshing them out and telling me why these are stories, telling me who you're going to talk to. Because all this is going to be very important as we build on this for your first story assignment.